Welcome to Cultivated Live for Friday, May 31st, the last day of May. My name is Jay Rosenthal. I am the co-founder of Cultivated Media, the host of this program called Cultivated Live. And since we launched Cultivated, our goal has been to be cannabis industry first, providing you with the most important, insightful, useful, and timely information. We do that in several key ways. One, through our daily newsletter at Cultivated Daily. We do that through this daily live stream called Cultivated Live. So we would love if you follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, get our daily newsletter to your inbox. You can go to cultivated.news to do that. All the links are below in the show notes. Today, I am joined by LJ Dawson, the editor-in-chief of the Outlaw Report. LJ, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
We're going to get into what the Outlaw Report is, what you're looking at today in terms of news we'll talk about the areas that you cover, and then what you're looking for in the future. But before we do, can I show you something funny that happened yesterday?
We're ready for it.
I will. Just keep your eyes. Let me give a hint for people watching. When you hear Jake Tapper, he does a slight pause in this, and I want you to keep your eyes open. Here, hold on one sec.
So the judge just turned to the jurors and said, "We received a note from you signed by your jury foreperson at 4:20 p.m. 4:20. Here come the verdicts. We have the verdicts."
I saw that on CNN, and I grabbed it, and I put it on YouTube as well. I feel like Jake Tapper wanted to tell a 420 joke. Do you think that's possible, or am I reading too much into it?
I don't think you are, Jay. I think he definitely saw 420 and almost said something, but it was a little bit too serious of a moment, and he stopped himself.
Yeah, he got caught up in the history of the moment, but also wanting to tell a weed joke. I really hope that's true. If we ever run into Jake Tapper, I'm going to ask him about that exact clip. Or maybe he'll reply on Twitter. We shall see. LJ, you are based in D.C. You are the editor-in-chief of the Outlaw Report. Give us a quick overview of the Outlaw Report, what you cover, the geography, and sort of just a bit of the background about the Outlaw Report.
Yeah, so the Outlaw Report is an online news media website. We put out a weekly newsletter as well, and we cover the Maryland, DC, and Virginia cannabis market. And we're very close together. Some of you know DC and Virginia and Maryland. They're all impacting each other, but they're totally different governments, totally different jurisdictions, and DC is not even a state. So we cover how they interact together. We cover all the different legislation, legality that's going on, and the cannabis markets in all three areas, which is always something chaotic going on, always new things happening, as is in all of the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and I'm not sure there's a more interesting dynamic that is existing in the country right now than Maryland, which had a big medical program, now has adult use. That rolled out. It'll be a year. It's 11 months. Like it's 11 months tomorrow.
Yeah, July. Mm-hmm.
We have Virginia, which we saw the legislature passed legalization, and then the governor vetoed it. So really a southern state where a Republican governor vetoed it. Then we have DC, which is its own unique animal. Give us what's happening in DC. Just to get the context, you can be at all three places in 15 minutes if you want. Like, give us a little background on what's happening in DC right now and the cannabis landscape.
Yeah, so unlike a state, DC actually doesn't have the independent authority to set up a legal cannabis market like we've seen happen across the country. And so we've been kind of stuck in this in-between place where we're trying to, since we don't have the state authority, we've tried to set up a medical cannabis market, which Congress allowed us to do. And then very soon after, they passed a spending bill with a writer called the Andy Harris writer, who is a Republican from Maryland, who has something against DC, we don't know what, and basically has kept us from being able to set up an adult use market. So we have our council here that's been trying to kind of pass some legislation that kind of makes us have as close to an adult use market as we can without actually being able to set up one. And so right now, in the last 2 years, we've basically passed a medical legal market expansion, and they've been trying to bring on new businesses, whether that's retail, cultivation, and also make it just really easy for you and I to register as a medical cannabis patient. You can self-certify here now. It's like a 5-minute process. You go online, you do it. Most of the dispensaries here actually help people do it. But you still have to be registered, right? So you can't be over 21 and go into a dispensary like you can in Maryland and just say, you know, here's my ID and purchase cannabis in an adult use way. So it's not recreationally legal. in DC. And so we're still trying to navigate that. And we have a lot of unique parts about this city too. We're a small space. DC has a lot going on, not just federal, the White House and all of that. We have a thriving community, and we have a lot smushed into a small space, whether it's cultivation, industrial manufacturing, and as we know, there's no interstate commerce yet. So DC, the legal market in DC is forced to get all of its legal product, produce all of its legal product, process all of its legal product here in the city, which can, cause obvious issues.
And there's lots of flower. From what I remember the last time I was at a dispensary, like there's lots of small growers. I mean, it's really only small growers providing these medical dispensaries their cannabis, and the flower's good.
Yeah, so it's small growers, but I think, we would be surprised actually at the tens of thousands of square feet that people have been able to find, develop into legal medical grows in DC. It's certainly not the size that you would even probably get in a bigger city like Los Angeles, right? Or, San Francisco. But we do have really high quality cannabis being produced here. However, there is some disconnect, right? Like we aren't at the level that California might be, or even the level that, somewhere like Maryland that has been able to find that space and attracted people to come and grow, right? Because that's the other thing. It's a small market compared to a whole entire state, even if we just have medical.
Yes. And though, what you also have similar to San Francisco and Los Angeles, and maybe Orlando, Florida too, and New York, is like a massive tourist base that comes to DC all the time. One of the it may be one of the highest traffic tourism areas in the world, certainly in the States. And like that has to be attracted to some future adult use market. But also I wonder how many of those tourists come to DC and understand that you can self-certify as a patient and it's not an onerous. They're like, how many people do we expect, or are there numbers or ideas like how many people come to town and go through the process to self-certify?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, Jay. So we've actually had one of the highest tourist seasons ever. I don't know if why that is. We didn't have a great cherry blossom season, so who knows? And it rained all the time. But we've had a lot of tourists coming this year, and the city council and our regulatory agencies made sure to set up a temporary self-authorization. So you can actually come in and get like a 30-day registration as a medical patient, which is awesome for people that are coming in. And I think, every month we have about 2,000 out-of-state registered patients, and then around the same for temporary registrations. And the highest state is actually Maryland, which is still fascinating, right? Because they have this huge access to all this, all this legal weed, but there's still obviously a couple thousand patients that come to DC from Maryland that, have their favorite dispensary here. And then beyond that, we have a high registration of patients from North Carolina and Florida. And so you can tell there are people that are participating in like weed tourism that are coming to DC. But one of the issues is we have a ton of unlicensed shops. So if you're walking around in DC, and if you have been any time since about 2015, 2016, there's something called I-71, which is a gifting initiative, which was a couple people's way of working around this inability for cannabis to be legalized in DC and for it to be adult use legalized. And basically it was an initiative that said, Jay, I can give you 2 ounces of cannabis and no one's going to come get after me. No one's going to get me in trouble. It was really intended just to allow people to home grow and then do like, community interpersonal sharing. However, everyone saw it a loophole and they were like, oh, we can, Jay, I can sell you this hat for $200 and then I'm going to give you this ounce of blackberry truffle, right? And all of a sudden we had this huge economic like boom of these shops, proliferating. And DC has always been the heart of cannabis culture because we've been the heart of a lot, whether it's, hip hop, cultural fashion. Like we've been a hub for a lot of cultural phenomena to come out of the nation's capital that have nothing to do with what you hear about on TV, right? House, right? There's more people here than the federal workers, which people forget about if they're not around this area. And so basically this ended up in having just all these shops that were unlicensed, that were working either completely underground and just renting off the books and just trapping out of a storefront. Or we had people who were legitimately filing their taxes and saying, you know, I made $2 million this year selling
hats. Yeah.
Or, exactly. And so we had this huge growth of shops come up. There's been some estimates of hundreds of shops that have been unlicensed. So DC is dealing with some of this issue like New York, right? Where we have a ton of unlicensed shops. And so when these tourists are coming in, they're most likely going to these shops because these shops are everywhere. They're on every block, they're on every corner, and you don't have to self-certify. You go in, some of them look very official. They look like dispensaries. You wouldn't know the difference. A tourist is not going to know the legal intricacies of federal, versus district jurisdiction. And so they're going into these shops that are very well placed, whether they're near the mall or wherever, and they're buying cannabis that way. And so the legal market is losing a lot of potential revenue because of that. And, why wouldn't I want to just walk into a shop and not give them all my information and have to fill out all this legal paperwork, even if it's just 5 minutes?
And those ones you're talking about, the gifting ones are called, you're going to correct me wrong, those are I-71 dispensaries. Is that right?
Yeah, we call them a couple different things. So like the community calls them I-71. There's been some actual like industry groups that have used I-71 to say that, they're I-71 certified shops, which is a little weird. You can't really certify yourself as a, amendment. And then we call them gifting shops too. And then usually you'll hear like the government regulators call them unlicensed dispensaries.
And so this brings us to something I read on the Outlaw report, which you're going to clarify for me. It seems like, and this is happening in New York as well, as you referenced, like the licensed shops, let's call them, the ones that you can self-certify as a patient, the medical dispensaries in DC, some of them are certainly angry. You just talked about it at the gifting shops, the I-71 shops that are taking away business, right, from tourists or otherwise. And there was something in your publication just about this. Tell us what's going on, because it seemed there's anger on some sides of this.
Yeah, so we've had some drama. Last week, the first letters went out a few weeks ago, but last week I got this tip that all these people are calling their the cannabis owners, the cannabis shop owners, and being like, we're getting this letter. And by all the people, I mean landlords. And so we had a bunch of letters sent out by a single lawyer saying that he represented something called the Alliance of Legal Cannabis Entities in DC. And this letter basically went out to, we don't know how many, we know at least, under like half a dozen letters that I've actually seen, but the rumors are that it could be over 100 letters were sent out to basically all of everyone in the industry that has ever rented to an unlicensed cannabis shop. And this letter basically said, we're legal businesses, we're this entity of legal businesses. And just to give you guys an idea, we have less than 7 dispensaries that are legal medical in DC. So this can't be, there's not a big pot to say like, who could this be, right? And upon reporting, we know it's not all of those dispensaries or entities that are part of this alliance. It's really not clear who's part of this legal cannabis entities alliance. And so they sent a letter out though. This lawyer called John Brunenkamp sent a letter out to all of these shops and basically said, you have participated as a landlord in allowing the illegal distribution of cannabis to happen and caused they said $600 million in damages to the legal market, these legal businesses that have been through the process that are medical cannabis dispensaries in DC. And basically they're saying, you need to reach out to us and we want you to come to us and settle for some amount. And 600 million might sound like a lot, but that's actually a number that has been brought up in council meetings. So it's something that's been thrown around. We don't have necessarily any like concrete evidence of that damage amount. But on the other hand, one could, whether this would stand up in court or not, one can only imagine, if we've had hundreds of unlicensed cannabis shops, how many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars they've made, right? Whether that would have been directly sent to the medical legal dispensaries if they didn't exist, who knows? So anyways, they sent out this letter and really kind of tried to scare a lot of people, scare these landlords.
Scare the landlords to kick out their tenants. Okay.
Right. So there's a few things, right? So obviously it's like, one, could this be to get people to kick them out, right? Or is this also like kind of a shakedown? Like, are they trying to actually recover some of the losses? Because the medical market in DC is actually not doing that great. We've had, we're probably the highest we've been in the last years has been over a little over $5 million. And when you look at somewhere like Maryland, that's doing tens of millions of dollars every month, that really gives you some perspective, right? And of course, we're only, a few businesses, but there is a huge cannabis desire in DC. And so we know that that's not all going to this medical legal avenue that people have, right? And so this letter went out, and I got calls that people were, one, laughing at it, like, this is crazy, like, what standing do they have? And then there were also some other dispensary owners or landlords that were like, we're taking this seriously, we're going to respond. And like, not that they thought that they needed to pay them necessarily, but they're really taking this seriously. And we'll see, Jay. This is going to be something that plays out potentially over years. This is not the only place in the country that is trying creative ways to weed out unlicensed cannabis shops. We know that New York struggles with this, has struggled with it. There's other places in Virginia that are doing adult sharing. I mean, there's unlicensed, unregulated cannabis shops across the country in all of these legal markets.
And what seems to me, and what I think they're slowly figuring out in New York as well, there's a crackdown mentality. That's like, if we just close down these shops, we will drive more business to the legal dispensaries or licensed dispensaries. That's one way of thinking about it. The way I like to think about it is, if they allowed more legal dispensaries and they open it up a little bit, and in this case, the federal government or Congress allowed for more of it, then these unlicensed shops would have less to sell and less pull. That's similar in New York. If there was actually more licensed dispensaries open, there would be more people going to them, fewer people going to the bodegas and such. But in this case, there are some unique attributes to DC, which is why it's good to talk to you, because the local landscape is local and unique. And unlike, while there's maybe some similarities of the challenges, there is some uniqueness to DC, which a local lens like you is always helpful to talk through, especially given the unique nature of the DMV, DC, Maryland, Virginia, and the interplay between those three, which is why the Outlaw report is so valuable and interesting to read, and why it's good to get your perspective. So that's sort of the Outlaw report. That's a little bit what's happening in DC. What are you looking to on the horizon as we get to sort of the 1 year mark in Maryland? I guess Virginia will have another legislative session, but they still have a Republican governor. Yeah. And DC is where DC is. Like, what are you watching over the next sort of weeks, months, and year, I guess?
Yeah, so we haven't talked a lot about Virginia and Maryland, so I'll start with that. So in Maryland, we're looking at them continuing to have an adult use market that's just crushing it. And there's very few dispensaries there. The medical dispensaries were allowed to transition to adult use as well. We just recently heard who got the lottery licenses, which is a little under 200. That includes like manufacturer, cultivation, and dispensary. And so those people have over a year to actually establish and open a business. And so Maryland, we're going to be kind of keeping an eye out on how is that going? Like, are these people actually able to even get into this market now that for almost a year, these some MSOs and also just businesses that were already open were able to just run away with millions of dollars in profit, right? So we're going to be watching that, seeing how this goes, seeing how Maryland continues to regulate and enforce upon their current licensees. And then in Virginia, we're kind of keeping an eye on hemp there, actually. They've been doing a lot of hemp enforcement. And so we're kind of watching, as we all are, as the Farm Bill goes through, to kind of see how hemp starts to be treated and continues to be treated in places like Virginia. And then also in Virginia, they have adult sharing going on, which does not have an initiative like I-71 to even pseudo-legally do it under. And so we're looking at the Virginia market still having super overpriced legal weed. There being studies done by their government where Virginians are actually still going out of state, as we see in DC. They come to us still to purchase legal medical cannabis or even go to the unlicensed market because it's so expensive there. So we're watching all of that, and we have no hopes anytime soon for a legal adult use market to launch in Virginia, thanks to Governor Glenn Youngkin. And then in DC, we actually have the last round of licenses opening up for our medical market expansion. And that's going to open up in July. And DC had a really interesting process where they, did a manufacturer around social equity, then a manufacturer standard. And we've been working through a whole entire year, basically, of license application periods versus Maryland, who just did a whole, round of, we have 170 plus licenses. Here you go. And so in DC, our last round is July, and that will be for standard dispensary licenses. And we have a little under 40 that are actually available. So in DC, we're going to be watching that unfold. And then we're also going to be watching how our cultivation expands, because we have over 50 dispensaries that haven't just applied. These are dispensaries that have been ushered into the next process of the regulatory approval stage. And we could potentially have 50 plus new dispensaries opening in DC.
They're going to need weed.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to need weed. And right now we only have 6 open, right? 6 medical legal dispensaries open. And so one of the big issues is how are we going to supply these new dispensaries that are coming online? There's a misunderstanding for some people that they're going to keep getting backdoor, dispo weed from Cali and be able to sell it in their legal dispensaries in DC. That's absolutely wrong. Everything has to be on metric. We're seed to sale, tracking everything here in DC. And so they're going to have to figure out where all this cannabis is coming from. Our regulatory boards are really working with cultivation centers that are currently up and running and expanding to really try and make sure we do have weed to even put in these dispensaries. But it's a huge expansion. DC is going from a very, very tiny medical market to potentially 900 times, what we are now, right? And so this is a really big jump. We have the inability to move independently still. So any legislation that would be needed to pass stuff, that is going to have to go through Congress and be approved. So we have to work with the legislation we have right now. We have to just kind of wiggle in and try to do what we can to get these stores stocked. And then we're going to be watching what's going on federally too, right? Rescheduling the Biden administration drug czar.
Yeah.
Thank you, czar.
A weird word to use.
Why do we use that word? Yeah. It's Russian, right?
It is, and fairly negative generally.
Yeah. So anyways, he actually just mentioned interstate commerce being a thing if rescheduling goes through, which is like huge. And one can hope that maybe that would really help DC out, right? There's tons of more affordable cultivation space in Maryland and Virginia. And if, DC was able to cultivate outside of DC and bring that cannabis in, that would be absolutely a game changer. Right now we import, I would say 99% of the cannabis that is consumed in DC is imported, obviously illegally, through the traditional market into the city. That's what we're looking for. Yeah, it's
well, I was just going to say, when I lived in DC, our weed came from West Virginia, actually.
Yes.
We had a guy out there. Yeah.
Yeah. West Virginia grows some good hemp too.
Yeah, it's a good place to grow. LJ, it's always good. Well, it's good to talk to you always. It's really good to talk to you on this program because I think getting deep inside of what's happening in the region is helpful, and specifically in DC, I think has even more resonance than the city itself. Like, people will look to DC as something really interesting that's happening because it is a unique in and of itself. We're going to have you back more and more. So folks who enjoyed this, you'll enjoy more and more LJ as time goes on. And thank you so much, and have a good weekend. And we're going to end the show here as well, just for all those. And one show note before we actually do end it, LJ, I will not be here on Monday. I'm traveling on Monday, so we will not have our program Monday. We'll be back on Tuesday. And actually on Tuesday, we will actually have a cannabis retailer from Ontario. We'll be doing it in person, so that's something to look forward to. But LJ, I really appreciate the time and the insight.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay. Thanks for everything you guys do at Cultivated and for having me. And can't wait to have our next conversation.
Great. And you can find LJ at outlawreport.com. And I know this because we talked about it before. A new website actually launched today. So go to outlawreport.com, find LJ, find everything that she's written, find deep insight about what's happening in the DMV, not the Department of Motor Vehicles, but DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Thank you so much. My name again is Jay Rosenthal. I'm the co-founder of Cultivated Media. You can find us at cultivated.news. I'll be back here on Tuesday, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on LinkedIn and YouTube. And my Twitter handle, which I think is JAYM Rosenthal. We sometimes stream to that too. And remember, if you're in a place that you can do this, buy cannabis at your local dispensary. Have a good week, good and safe weekend. LJ, thanks again.